This is Birthing at Home, a podcast. I'm Elsie, your host. I'm a homebirth mum of 2 little boys. I'm a mental health nurse and the co-creator of Homebirth Victoria. If you want to learn more about me, the podcast, or my work, check out www.birthingathome.com.au. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land I'm recording on in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. I would also like to acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been birthing at home on country for tens of thousands of years prior to the British invasion, and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. This episode is a part of the Homebirth Around the World series. In this episode, I chat with Paul Golden. It was a fantastic conversation, and I urge women and midwives alike to listen. Paul is a travelling midwife who has supported women all over the world, but he is also well known in the birth and human rights space. We talk about Paul's journey to midwifery in this episode and his study of the law and how this has led him to becoming one of the most highly regarded midwife mediators in the world. We touch on topics such as bodily autonomy, representing yourself, protecting your practice as a midwife, what could be called witch hunts of midwives, criminalisation of doulas, and so much more. It is a particularly relevant episode for women, families, and midwives, no matter where you are in the world. Paul has also recently released a book for midwives in particular, aimed at helping to keep midwives safe. The link for this will be in the episode description. Enjoy. Welcome, Paul, to Birthing at Home, a podcast.
Thank you for having me, Elsie.
Thank you for joining me. Paul, are you able to, because like we've just sort of touched on, you are the travelling midwife. Are you able to let the listeners know where you're located and maybe give a little bit of an intro to yourself?
Sure. I'm on planet Earth. It's got a moon, a sun, and a bunch of other planets around it. So Excellent. That includes starting at the bottom in the South Pacific near Antarctica, wonderful islands called Aotearoa. People call it New Zealand. And next to that's a big continent, Australia. I've travelled and worked all around there for 40 years.
Wow.
And then in between is Asia. I've lived in particularly North India, worked in Pakistan and with Afghan people and Tibetan refugee groups. Also in England, where I did training in midwifery, it was with a Pakistan population-based hospital near Oxford. And I did nursing, which led me into intensive care for adults, children, babies. And that led me to midwifery because I was with babies and families were asking me to be at their births. Wow. So that was in the 80s. And I did law. I started law in the 70s, and I've carried on doing law throughout. So also natural therapies is something, it's normal in India, for example, Ayurvedic acupuncture, homeopathy, and it's normal in Korea, Japan, China, acupuncture and things like this. So I studied those things just as a normal thing. And some hospitals would include that in those countries. Then you come to a European, in fact, in Germany, they give homeopathy in maternity hospitals quite routinely, and in Austria. And then in the UK, they treat it like witchcraft generally. Yeah. So you've got the same body, the same physiology with our whole family health, our whole health, and maternity health is the same physiology, but treated so differently in different countries. Even in Europe, even Austria to Germany, who speak the same language, will be very different.
Yeah, holy moly. That's quite incredible, the wealth of knowledge that you've had, and I can't even imagine what incredible, the amount of incredible stories you must have. I've just been writing down all those different countries. That's one of the most diverse sort of set of experiences that I've really ever heard of, especially in midwifery. So you found midwifery after having worked in some of these places and women were asking for you to support them in birth. Is that right? Or in their pregnancy?
Yes. And all they were looking for is calmness, confidence, capability. So the fact I had experience as a nurse, intensive care, I knew about physiology, where sometimes midwives, we don't study enough about anatomy and physiology, the heart, the lungs, other things. And I'm constantly surprised that some of my colleagues' lack of understanding about what can go wrong. Anybody could have a blood clot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we
And
need to recognise signs of other things. So it really does us good to even have a week in intensive care or medical surgical wards. And some midwives, no, that's nothing to do with birth, don't need to know it. But what if the woman you're with, who's had a wonderful, healthy life, pregnancy and birth, then has a problem afterwards? How
yeah.
skilled? Oh, well, I'll call a doctor. But what if you're the only one there? There's an artery bleeding. You've got to stop it. And if you've seen other people and worked alongside, doctors should not generally be involved with birth, but they're very skilled in surgery and medicine. And we learn a lot from them in those spheres.
Yeah, absolutely. I was watching a little video. I'll link it in the description. I think with Eva Births, is that her name? She's the famous photographer. I think. Is she from? I think she's from Sweden or something.
In
But I was
Norway is Eva Rose.
Norway.
Yes, she's a friend of
Yes.
mine. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I was watching her video with you, and you were talking about your experiences working in like very like remote places or places that don't have access to the kind of medical care. And I guess that's something that's especially relevant here in Australia and in the context of home birth, because for many people their argument against home birth is that Australia, at least this is, the sort of comments that I sometimes hear, is that home birth doesn't work in Australia because people most of the population of Australia lives on the East Coast and in cities and whatnot, but the rest of Australia is quite spread out, like access to tertiary hospitals or even, just medical care can be hours away, hours and hours. And that's, also taking into account, Indigenous communities that often live very remote. But then also, if you take home birth away from that sort of context, then their birth outcomes are usually worse than, white European Australians. So it's quite a complicated thing. Because they have their lack of access to, or their challenges in accessing, I guess, holistic and adequate care. I mean, there's lots of like chronic health and mental health.
Okay, I started. I worked in Port Hedland and Derby and around Broome. So people who don't know, listening to this, that's the top northwest of Australia that's extremely remote. You're 2,000 kilometres away from a big tertiary unit hospital.
Yeah.
So there's good and bad with that. The bad is women, particularly Aboriginal women, might come to a hospital a month before their due date and just simply sit and wait for the baby to come.
Yeah.
And that felt a bit patronising, quite an indoctrination. And yet people are very kind. The hospital's friendly. They're very respectful in general. One of the amazing benefits of the Outback is that the doctors will be trained in obstetrics and pediatrics and anaesthetics. So they don't pass the buck to somebody else. They take a lot of responsibility. They make sure their skills are up. And I was very humbled to see dedicated, kind doctors, unlike I would see in the UK. An obstetrician is not so interested in the baby generally. Some of them are, because that's somebody else's job. They're not really interested in the anaesthetic side of it. That's somebody else's job. So for the GPs to be so well trained because of the remoteness, we worked as a really good team. I've worked in Queensland Outback, in Emerald and other places like that. And I've seen great practices, but I keep seeing the states overreaching and saying, oh, somebody with a BMI above such and such has to go to tertiary hospital. That's leave their home, leave their family, because they're deemed high risk. And it's just a problem of labelling risk. And it should be the woman's choice to some extent. But of course, the clinicians are put in situations where we might consider somebody to be a high risk. But these remote places, do women really need to go a month early and sit and wait at a hospital? Could they have home birth? Now, there are great teams, MGP, midwifery group practices in Australia. In the UK, there are some great home birth teams, but they mostly get suspended because they need to work in the labour ward in the hospitals, short-staffed.
Yeah.
So all the time home birth is closed down, and that gives less choice. In Australia, I don't think people pay for a midwife ever, a few under the radar. But in England, it's quite common for people, particularly if they're fairly wealthy or not always wealthy, but they've just allocated funds, they will pay for an independent private midwife that's outside the system. And as we were talking earlier, that means paying in England £1,500, 3,000 Australian dollars for insurance for one birth.
Yeah.
But saying that, the midwives are not limited on twins, VBAC and breech, whereas in Australia, I think the midwives' insurance and regulation prevents them from twins, VBAC and breech, or you can correct me.
Yeah, it's definitely not encouraged. I think a big part of it is that there is no, in Australia at this particular time in the start of 2025, there is no professional indemnity insurance option for intrapartum care. So midwives attending the birth at a home birth are not covered by professional indemnity insurance. And so there's an exemption that the government has said last year they're going to remove, and they've got until the end of 2026, I believe to create a product. Which is a lot of, there's still a lot of fear and a lot of unanswered questions around that. And
could they do what New Zealand did and Sweden? Both countries have a no-fault compensation scheme.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I guess the home birth community and advocacy groups are hoping for. I personally am not that optimistic. I don't particularly find Australia to be a very home birth supportive country, whilst obviously, like we spoke about before, the interview with Lucy, and she was explaining the amount that the professional indemnity insurance adds to the overall cost of a private midwife. Like a private midwife in Australia is, well, it depends where you live, but it's $7,000 to $10,000, and that's mostly out of pocket. The woman, there's no private health insurance that covers that. Medicare doesn't cover that, and it's mostly the birth component. So it's very inaccessible. There's not a lot of midwives. I think not a lot of private midwives attending home births in comparison to...
Are they allowed to do VBAC, twins and breech?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think you can, if you've in breech. Obviously there's a big push with Breech Without Borders, and I have heard of midwives supporting breech at home, but because there's no professional indemnity insurance for the birth, it's a risk that each midwife has to take, I suppose. Twins sometimes you hear about, but mostly twins are being, if somebody wishes to birth their twins at home in Australia, it's majority of the time a free birth, because midwives majority.
But also there's a few cases of surprise twins. I'm focused on surprise twins because I am one myself. Half an hour after I was born, my brother was born, 6.5 pounds, 3.5 kilos or 3 kilos each.
Wow.
I saw recently somebody in Australia had this, and also a few years ago, I think she's Danish or Dutch midwife in Melbourne, and I think she's lost her license for 10 years. But
I think she was German.
Somebody not having is she? So I invited them to engage with me, because alongside all my clinical work and support to families and clinicians is the legal stuff. And people are being sanctioned. Now, you wouldn't know if a woman's in a tub of water at home giving birth to a baby and there's a second one behind it. She didn't have a scan and nobody knew there was twins. And then you lose your license, because that's how the regulator's working in many countries. And I thought that's the case in Australia.
I'm not up to date on how some midwives are able to support it in a, I guess, legal way. I think that it comes with the, I think it's the NMBA, which is the Nurse and Midwifery Board of Australia guidelines, and it categorises again in terms of risk and when you should be seeking obstetric recommendation or input. But yeah, with the surprise twins, I'm not sure.
So if we look at that, because there have been cases, say, for example, there was the case of twins where one died and had the care by the now very well-known deregistered midwife Lisa Barrett, and the family were themselves criticised by the coroner in the coroner's court, but they pointed out it's their choice, it's bodily autonomy. They have things done to them in the hospital. She'd had 3 cesareans against her wishes and was very having a lot of obstetric violence, and when doctors agreed to do one thing and then a different doctor's on duty and doesn't do what's agreed to and does something else, so again pushing induction, leading to unnecessary cesareans. So that woman chose to have her twins at home. She chose a deregistered midwife because that's the only person that could attend her, and then they're having criminal cases against them. So I kind of forgot the point I was going to make there. Basically, it's bodily autonomy and woman's choice. So when people say, we can negotiate or talk to the Nursing Midwifery Board, they've set down rules. Oh, no, you have to talk to a senior obstetrician. That was what came out of the coroner's report. And they're making it like law. You cannot make a law about who touches someone's body and who does not. That woman can choose. But she might choose to be outside the hospital system, and she's taking some risk. But she's taking more risks birthing in a hospital. She has more chance of harm in a hospital, and that's proven from so much research. And just the way they're treated, but especially the babies. Cutting the cord. I'm just dealing with a legal case now. Oh, they didn't cut the cord when the baby needed resuscitation. So therefore, that delayed resuscitation. No, you resuscitate on the cord. Clinically and evidentially and research all supports that. But we've still got bossy people using bossy language of telling clinicians what clinicians should have done. And the clinician is the one who's in the unique circumstances. So that nurse, midwife, doctor can see the baby's colour, reflexes, tone, their breathing effort, their heart rate, and they can assess what the child needs, or if a mother's bleeding at home, does she need transfer to hospital? But if the woman says, I refuse your treatment, whether it's for my baby or for myself, up until the baby's born, she can refuse. Once the baby's born, everybody has a responsibility to the baby and the baby's acquired rights. In Europe, the baby acquires rights before it's born, which is why they're overly interventionist, because they believe they have the right to interfere on behalf of the unborn baby. I'll shut up there.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. I don't even know what to say. What was that? Sorry.
You're shocked. Which bit are you shocked? You sound shocked. Which bit in particular?
Just always, it's a surprise. It's a surprise, but it's not a surprise. It's just very frustrating that this is, not a unique problem, that it feels like we're up against such strong forces. I wonder what your thoughts are about I was going to say why, but I feel like I know why, mostly because of the
ask anyway.
Why is this happening, Paul? Why is it not unique to Australia or Europe or anywhere we go? Why?
So at the moment, we have one of the worst criminal cases where a doctor who's dedicated his life to natural birth, what they call the humanization of birth in Brazil, Ricardo Jones. He's been jailed for 14 years. His wife is a midwife, worked with him at the same home birth. The baby was born with congenital pneumonia, so had a lung infection and would very likely have died wherever the baby was. But they transferred to hospital, and there's criticisms about whether there was a delay, whether there's hiding information because you're having a home birth and that's outside the system, you're going to be criticized. But the system sets people up kind of to fail, that if you do work outside the system and then you're honest to the system, you're found guilty. If you hide from the system, then you're also found guilty. So that case of 14 years in jail, we've got Gloria May in Canada in jail at the moment waiting trial, and people, states and countries, I'll come back to why this happens. Basically, it's because they can. They won't if they can't. So when we have abuse of power, whether it's Abu Ghraib in Guantanamo Bay, anything like that, in hospitals, people with uniform, they have power, they abuse it. They themselves come in to give birth. So I've worked in the Baltic and the Balkans, particularly in the Balkan region, loads of abuse considered normal. We used to have that in England. Women might have their face slapped in labour by a clinician. It could be a midwife or a doctor. That's changed because people had legal rights to challenge and change things in, say, the UK, and they went to court and things stopped. They got better. In other countries, like the Balkans, but all of Europe is backward. I'm quite happy to insult Europe and say it's backward. It's based on medieval kind of semi-religious beliefs that it's transferred to doctors. So judges and courts look up to doctors so much. We saw that in the Lucy Letby case of a wrongful conviction in the UK, putting a nurse in jail for some babies that died more from medical negligence and hospital failings. She's still in jail and she hasn't had her conviction overturned yet, but we're very hopeful it will be. So the answer to your question is they do it because they can. They won't if they can't. So how is it we can change it so they can't? And it's to stand up for our human rights, to act. When we fail to plan, we may be planning to fail. It's not always true. But when we fail to act, for example, when we fail to defend ourselves, it's too late. I see cases all the time where the person says, I'm a nice, kind midwife. I did all the best I could. Here's my notes. And they are sent to jail or have their registration taken away or sanctioned in some way. And their innocence is not enough. I do not doubt that you and most people are in the caring business because they want to care about others. But if we look at the deeper psychology, what motivates us? Probably we're wishing to have that care and that love to ourselves. We want to give it to others because we want to get it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It can be quite healthy as long as we have awareness, we have responsibility, we are able to respond. If we don't have awareness, like I've gone to work, I've put my uniform, I've got my pager, I'm an important person, that's a form of addiction. And addiction comes from pain, from childhood things. So this is going down the Gabor Mate compassionate inquiry kind of way. So he himself was happy to be buzzed for a birth, and he would have 10 or 20 births maybe in a day. He was thrilled. And he also goes to be with people who were dying. He was an important doctor. He had a pager and it would beep, beep, beep. But then he learnt about this, and he learnt that he sacrificed his family relationships, particularly with his children, and he's now rebuilding that. And he talks honestly and openly. If you and I can be honest and open about our victimhood, our vulnerabilities, our motivations, we won't be projecting so much of rescuing and saving all these women. I'll come to your home birth and the state's bad, but I'll be good. And it isn't like that. We need to be compassionate with our enemies because they're really represent a part of ourselves. I have an identical twin. It's very annoying, and I've learnt a lot from that. We all have partners in life. Our partners annoy us in the morning, but we get along with them in the evening, perhaps. So we've got to embrace that. When people are saying, no, home birth's bad, we just love them and find out why. What is it you want? How do you want that? But the one word from all this is act. We should act. We should do something. It could be quietly acting, going to your friend, neighbour, relative's home birth. It could be writing an article. It could be challenging the government. It could be taking legal action against somebody or an organisation. We need to act. So being passive brings me to the beautiful poem from Auschwitz where a German man watched the Nazi people, at first supported them, then criticised them when they were desecrating churches. They put him in a concentration camp in Auschwitz. And he wrote the poem that when they came for the others, I didn't stand up for them because I wasn't the communist, the socialist, the Russian, the Jew. But when they came for me, there was nobody left to stand up for me. So when we talk about home birth, I talk about human rights for all of us affecting everything. The state interferes, and in Australia they made a law. It's a joke law. They've done it. I call it a joke. It says we have unlimited powers to do with childbirth. If anybody attends a birth, we have unlimited powers to investigate and sanction that person. And they don't. There's something called international human rights. The right to private and family life is Article 8. Everybody has that, the practitioner and the family. So if a woman chooses not to go to the hospital, she has a home birth, midwife goes to attend her, and she's sanctioned, or a doula, and that's happening increasingly in Australia. Also the Netherlands, they're criminalising doulas, are being taken to sit jail for a few days while they're interrogated about what happened at a birth, particularly if there's a poor outcome and the baby died. Now I've lost my thread there, because I'm thinking when a baby dies, the whole blame game, when some babies are going to die in hospital, but we don't have the blame game so much.
Yeah, I know, and I don't fully understand this. Of course, if you're not listening in Australia, and you've not been to Australia, maybe you can be forgiven for not understanding how big Australia is. But every state, we do things differently for some weird reason. But I do know that for some reason in South Australia specifically, there is a lot of fear amongst doulas about being in trouble. I can't remember the specifics. It's not the same like in Victoria. I don't really know if I've heard.
It's because Lisa Barrett was in South Australia.
There you go.
And she deregistered and became a doula.
Wow.
And I was actually I was in Perth in King Edward Hospital talking to the head of midwifery some years ago. And she said, we send families to Lisa because we cannot look after them. The breech twins want home birth. We're not able to. So we send them to her. So she was taking all the extra high risk cases. It was inevitable. Sometimes there'd be poor outcome. A baby could die. Yeah, and it's a total angry blame game. She trained as a lawyer. They wouldn't let her practice law because of the case she'd had clinically.
Oh, my goodness.
That could have changed. I don't know.
I'm not
too
sure.
In touch with her. It's important to study the laws on that, because everybody's naively and innocently practicing, and they are the victim tomorrow. If we don't get smart, and the word act, I said, could just be read up on these cases and figure out how to protect yourself and keep your clients safe, how to have choice. And mostly, one of the things I find is challenging everyone. When somebody challenges me, I very compassionately turn around, challenge them back, and then we work out a path. But if I'm a victim to their challenge or I angrily react against them, it doesn't work. I need to mediate and find a middle path, and that's a compassionate way.
Yeah, oh my gosh. Do you know anybody else that's doing something similar to you in terms of like legal action and be in the birth world?
I wish there was.
Holy moly.
We just had a meeting with Ricardo Jones' son. So his father's in jail. His mother's got an 11-year sentence and she's outside jail. When he did a literature search about the Agnes Gereb case in Hungary, my name was probably one of the more significant ones for somebody who criticised the government of Hungary for persecuting when they prosecuted the case, that they went really outside any reasonable bounds of normality. And they attacked this midwife, they put her in jail, and it was our letters and our shining a light internationally caused embarrassment that created the foundation for them to grant clemency. And we need to do the same in Brazil. But no, there's some people that write about law, there's some people that write about birth. Because I do both, it's fairly unusual. I hope there are other people, but I find I'm quite often the only voice in a group meeting about, well, let's take some legal action. And just now there's a colleague in a regulatory hearing. The hearing is never conducted properly. And I always put them on notice that they will have a legal case against them, including, here's a trigger warning, it's very sensitive, gross negligent manslaughter. We have in the UK about 6 nurses and midwives commit suicide a year when they're being investigated, because they're investigated so improperly, so harshly, as if the allegations are true. Even little things like you've ticked a box on an application for a job form and you maybe got that box tick wrong, and then you're told you're dishonest and you're going to lose your license, and they take the license away. You go to the High Court to get it reinstated. But you're doubting yourself because you think, all my friends and family, all they're seeing is that I'm a dishonest professional. So that leads to manslaughter in a way, gross negligent manslaughter, because these bodies repeatedly, aggressively persecute, not prosecute. In most criminal trials, you have a right to know all the information so the defense can defend itself properly. If the prosecution have stuff, they mustn't hide it. With the regulatory cases, they're kangaroo courts, and the real courts often say, well, they're a professional body, they know what they're doing, we'll leave them alone. So that's enabling It's a kind of complicit corruption by the courts that allows bad regulation to go on. The UK has some of the worst, but it varies in other countries. I mentioned Lucy Letby. In Netherlands, there was Lucia de Burke put in jail for murder and released because statistically and all the evidence was totally flawed. So we've got very aggressive systems, and we're kindly doing our work today. We need to protect ourselves. That's a lot of it is writing down what the client has said they do and don't want, get the client to sign and say what they do and don't want, get it witnessed as far as possible. Do the best we can reasonably. We can't be always protective because the shift now happens that people are working on a fear base, not what's best for the woman and baby, but what's best to keep their job, their liberty, and their license.
Well, I guess I don't know what the suicide rates are for nurses and midwives specifically in Australia, but I do know that APRA investigates private midwives much more than any other profession that they regulate. And so homebirth midwives are scared.
That's a form of discrimination. That's the reason I interrupt there. So discrimination against independent midwives, but also against a belief system. If we're believing in physiological birth and we support and promote that, and then we're sanctioned more than others, that is a form of discrimination. It's Article 14, which cannot be taken by itself. It has to be with one of the other articles, like the right to private and family life. But also Article 6, the right to a fair process, is very clear that people are having that breached. And the final one, Article 3, is the right not to suffer inhumane and degrading treatment. Having your license and things publicized, oh, you're a bad person, maybe you killed a baby, you didn't. This is what leads to the suicides. So people need to take civil action. That the regulator is doing 3 civil wrongs. That is, they're doing a wrongdoing in the public office, they're breaching their statutory duty, and they're negligent. They're causing harm to the registrant. Plus, some of those human rights that I've mentioned, and they file that case, and you'll often find the threat of litigation gets mediation. That regulator may realise, or their legal advisors will tell them, you're going to lose, or even if you don't lose, you're going to have massive embarrassment, massive cost. We should talk to this person. So then you get them involved in a conversation about how the regulator's over-regulating and how they need to do it more proportionately, fairly, and reasonably. That's what justice is about. And instead, we're too often, let's blame the nurse or midwife or even doctor.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've thought about this quite a few times and I wish I knew more details. But one of the, I think, like I've said, I'm a mental health nurse, but I did study midwifery for 3 years. And on my final midwifery placement, I worked alongside a midwife in the MGP of the hospital that I was placed at. And she shared with me how she, I guess you don't completely lose your registration, but it was on pause because she was investigated because a baby died and it was all pinned on her, despite the woman had multiple contacts with various obstetricians, other doctors, other midwives, but somehow it got all pinned on her and she wasn't allowed in birth suite for a number of years as a repercussion. But I just remember hearing that as a student and thinking, what the heck? That's so intense. And I do know that
this will happen if we fail to act. So what she could do, and what I've supported people in this position, you go on the offensive. So you target the employer and say, the way you're treating me is discriminatory, and all the things I've talked about in this podcast. You target the regulator, so they have to answer your questions. You take them to court. You do not pay a lawyer anything. In America, they're completely insane, and Canada. They're paying hundreds of thousands to lawyers. So how, one lawyer must be earning millions a year. You can take the case yourself. People are so terrified of the courts, but if we're capable of reading a medical textbook, we're capable of reading a law book. And judges in the lower courts particularly are quite happy for people to represent themselves. So you should take a case against the employer, against the regulator, anybody else that's doing wrong things. Again, we only have the rights we stand up for. And quite often we're responding to somebody's bad conduct against us, their persecution. We're not being offensive, taking them to task. getting them on the back foot. So when I file a case, they've got 14 days to give a defence. If they don't, they lose the case.
Wow. Yeah. Holy moly.
And quite
Maybe
often,
I need to
just
become
saw
a
it as a
lawyer, Paul.
draft. But even if you don't file it with the courts, you fill out the form, and if there isn't a form, you make your own one, who you are, who they are, what they did wrong. And I've already said it in this podcast, the civil things, the human rights things, you could put a number, you have to put a financial amount on it, whatever the amount that court deals with, could be 50,000, whatever. People say, I don't want money, I want an apology, I want my registration back. You have to go for a number, because that is a kind of an apology. That is how the system will correct itself. They say, oh, look, we're losing money paying for lawyers to represent, and now we've had to pay compensation, damages. We must stop doing this. So in my own case, I lost my license in the UK. I have it in many other countries, although they probably wouldn't want to renew it when they know the UK took it away, purely for the technical thing of not having indemnity insurance in the UK when I gave some antenatal care in France. And they were aware of it.
Yeah.
And because I do a lot of legal cases, they said, oh, no, we've got global reach. I said, well, what about when I'm in Africa and India? You don't care or ask. India just says, thank you for coming. They're not going to worry if you have registration or indemnity. If you have skills and ability, they're happy with it, in general, of course.
Yes.
And the regulator ignores what they want, but they hid my defence. I wrote 230 pages. They had over 1,000 pages. I presented it, and they hid it. Didn't let me into my own hearing, and then told the judge that I didn't turn up and things like this. And the judge, who's married to a particularly negative type of obstetrician, said, I'm a black market midwife, just doing it for the money. I don't care about mothers and babies. Never had a complaint in 40 years from a family against me. And I'm a bloke doing this job. And with Pakistan, Arabic, Middle Eastern, all sorts. I sit on the bedside and say, I'm sorry, maybe that was a mistake. We could have done this thing earlier or later. How are you for this? My honesty, empathy, connection with the families is what helps us. I've also had doctors make mistakes with my care, put me in intensive care a couple of times. They've come and apologized and sat on the bed and I'm really sorry, I could have done something different. That's fine. But when we hide mistakes, and that's what the system often does, you'll find CTGs have disappeared, notes have disappeared, and they blame one person, often the nurse or midwife.
Yeah. Yeah, holy moly, I have so many thoughts going through my head. So in so many places that you've worked, which country is supporting home birth the best? If you could comment on such a thing, or what do you
Frankfurt, Germany.
Why? What's so special about Frankfurt in Germany?
Well, as you mentioned, Breach Without Borders, who are fantastic. Everybody, even for free, go and look at their website, see the videos. If you do the course, incredible. Do the course again, do the in-person course, hands-on training, great. There's also a breech specialist provider, educator, Frank Lewin in Frankfurt, and they have their own hospital and maternity clinic. 100 to 150 vaginal breech births a year. They're planned. It is a hospital, so there's a little bit of medicalisation, but they're doing really great stuff. But that philosophy has spread around. So some of the midwives around Frankfurt are doing home birth, breech, twins, VBAC. In theory, they have to be with a doctor, say the VBAC, and they might call the hospital and say, she's in early labour, we'll see how it goes, and the birth eventuates, and they're not being sanctioned. In other countries, they're being sanctioned. You should have a doctor involved. In Brazil, they're being told you must have a paediatrician at every home birth. Well, that's simply not reality anywhere. You don't have that in anywhere I know. So people impose false standards just so you can fail them and they can sanction you. But I just picked that one off the top of my head. Anywhere where I see good, calm, confident, capable practice can be an individual. But the distinction is that individual knows to protect themselves, to working. I like this word partnership. It's a very strong Kiwi word, or New Zealand partnership with women. So I will turn the notes around if I'm in a hospital. She doesn't want me to listen to the heartbeat. She's just changed her mind. She did agree to it. Now she doesn't. Turn it around. And she doesn't want to sign it. She wants to kick her legs out or something. But the partner could sign it, or the other midwife or the student, or I'll just sign it if I'm the only one there. So I'm often quietly practicing the best care I can, but I'm documenting as if a judge is watching. I like the phrase dance like nobody's watching. True. Let go all your inhibitions and dance freely. But document as if it's a fact finder judge reviewing your stuff in 5 years' time. And you can't say, oh, I'm good, kind of reasonable. You say, when you say the fetal heart, I just dealt with a case now. They said, oh, the midwife's so experienced and the fetal heart was 128, but the baby, when it was born, looked like it had died a week before. So clearly that must have been the mother's heart rate. But that midwife's so experienced, she would not make that mistake. A forensic analysis would be, what were the two heartbeats?
Yeah.
You'd have to show that you had two distinct heartbeats. And people say, obs normal, obs are fine, observations are okay. But what are they? What's the temperature? What's the blood pressure? Where did you take the blood pressure, left or right arm, standing or sitting? Define the observations. And that comes from my nursing kind of medical background, that I would be very clear. And I mean, they still got me on the technicality of not having indemnity insurance for France. I appealed. So that's 5 years without a license. I was suspended at first, and then 2 years ago I had the High Court hearing with the mad, bad judge who I'm criticising here, but compassionately criticising. And I think, well, when a door closes, another one opens, and my work is very much supporting others to help them either prevent, have a case, or deal with it. Hence my books. And Keeping Midwives Safe is what it says it is. It's a fairly dyslexic, chaotic book, but it has lots of templates to save people any effort. If you go to a lawyer and pay 200 or more for an hour, and you buy the book for £10 or euros, and it gives you much more help than going to the lawyer because you help yourself. The one I'm finishing hopefully this month is Protect Your Practice. It will be more organized, more in depth, and just a stronger way of defending and taking actions, including murder and manslaughter. Any of us could have a baby. The baby born to Lisa Barrett in South Australia was dead. It had no heartbeat, no breathing. It was dead. Paramedics came. They tried to resuscitate the baby, put their gadget on that said, oh, it's got electrical activity. And it didn't really. So then we're having to redefine what is death. To anybody else, a baby who's not breathing, has no heartbeat, that's dead. And yet, because they wanted to get her, they said, it's not a stillbirth, it was a baby born alive because there's electrical activity, therefore you're responsible for the death. And they didn't even necessarily expect to win the case. By taking a case for 5 years, they've done the harm. I'm going to mention the case in America. Everybody listening, look it up on YouTube. There's two I'll mention. One is the episiotomy case, and that was settled out in mediation. A black woman on her back, 21 years old, whose mother was saying, it's okay, doctor, you can cut her, when the woman said, do not cut me, stop, stop, stop. And the doctor did several episiotomies. And that's a good case for legal reasons. The better case, Live Court TV did Angela Hock, Hock. The last few minutes, 10 minutes of that case, it went on for some time. It was a 3-year case. In the courts, it went on for a few hours. The last 10 minutes, the judge says the state failed to prove that midwife killed the baby. She did the best she could. Everybody did the best they could. But the hospital reported her because, if that was in hospital, this breech birth, they would never have died. Like nobody dies in hospital. There's more and more research, not only showing deaths and preventable injuries in hospitals. In England, we have Ockenden, Kirkup and others. One hospital had 47 babies that were preventable deaths. And there's no criminal case there. When you're a home birth independent midwife, you're having it. So it's protect yourself, good documentation. But also people think their clients who love them can't turn. Clients do turn on the midwife, particularly if they have a sad outcome.
That too. And I mean, that's, I guess, maybe when sometimes your documentation might be more inclined to become a bit more lax. But I mean, grief does a lot of crazy things too, of course.
But I'll comment on that. Even if you're affected by grief and the drama of whatever's happening, use the dictaphone. Just open it on your phone and say, the mother's blood pressure, the baby came out, it's white and floppy. I've done blah, blah, blah. I've called the ambulance at 12 minutes past 2. You're getting some facts down. If you can't get a pen and paper, which is a brilliant way to do it, record it. It's another way because you can still use your hands.
Yeah. This is not as intense, but in my first pregnancy, my first planned home birth, I wanted very much to decline the glucose tolerance test. And I thought that I knew that I could decline and it would be all good. And I said, I will write whatever you want me to write to decline this test. And they told me that if I did not have the test, that they would likely not be able to support my home birth. And that came into like a complication that I'd never really thought about, is that in Australia, there's, at least in Victoria, there's more publicly funded home birth programs popping up, and more, opportunities for women to sort of have a step in the maternity system, but also in the hospital system, sorry. But because of the way that midwives are treated, obviously, like you said, the partnership amongst health professionals is also very, very important. And so a lot of private midwives I hear, when they need to go transfer to the hospital, even though, these publicly funded home birth programs, I hope, help with the culture, the private midwives are being greeted in ED, being told, you are a witch, essentially. What are you doing? Why you thought you were too good for us and now you're coming to ask for help. So, there's more of a push for private midwives to be connected with hospitals. And that's where I got caught out, is that the private midwife business that I went with had a connection with a hospital. And it was the hospital that was saying that we will not support you if your women do not have the glucose tolerance test. And so I was essentially blackmailed into having this test. And I feel so angry about it still, that it could happen. But I hear about these stories quite frequently.
It also happens with BMI.
Yes.
I'm going to be slightly challenging to you in a gentle but slightly rude way. You allowed yourself to be blackmailed.
Yes.
So what somebody could do in that situation is to stand up for their human rights and just say, oh, so you're discriminating against me for not wanting to have the thing. You don't actually have to decline anything, and you certainly do not ever have to sign anything, even to leave a hospital against medical advice. There is no legal requirement to sign anything. They want you to. They want all sorts of things, but you don't have to do it. And a simple word to swap for declining is kind of, I'll think about it. I'm considering it. And same with giving a vaccination to your baby or vitamin K or anything else. They might threaten people with social workers. So again, they're giving into their blackmail. Oh, well, I was told if I didn't have an induction, they might send the social workers. A woman in Spain was taken by police into the hospital to have an induction. She had a very bad birth that left her physically and mentally traumatized. The United Nations Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, briefly put CEDAW, that I write reports to, they never have before made a judgment. They've only made recommendations. In this case, they made a judgment against the state of Spain, and Spain was embarrassed and had to pay money to the woman. So if we stand up for our human rights, that's tragic that happened to her. But before things happen, like we're just being treated less favourably because we're independent. I quite often use this phrase, oh, I'm sure you wouldn't like to discriminate against me. Because if you do, that's discriminating against the family I'm caring for, because I'm working independently, or because I'm a man, or because I'm actually with my travels. Sometimes I'm in a country and they're like, where do you live? We want your address. And it's like, oh, I'm sure you don't want to discriminate against me because I'm a gypsy or because I'm homeless. And that turns the tables of responsibility back on them to answer instead of you or I. So back to your point, you felt blackmailed. People do not have to decline. They don't have to sign anything. And I really strongly suggest taking action. The action could be a draft action that you'd never file in the courts. You give it to the chief executive of that hospital. We are being treated differently because we're independent midwives or private midwives. And this is a form of discrimination. We could take an action against you. It's going to cost you time. We don't even have to point it out. They know it's going to cost them money and embarrassment and a lot of resources. And the chief exec is likely to tell the staff they have to behave in a different way. They also have regulatory elements to what you've just said. That's not okay. So one could go to their regulator, whoever's treating them badly in the emergency department, and have good evidence. Almost you wish you have body camera to capture it. I know there's a very famous midwife in Australia who's got a PhD and is very big on the academic side. And she's also a home birth midwife and gets treated badly when she goes in, even though she's revered for her academia. So people do it again because they can. They won't if they can't. It's up to you and I and everybody listening to stand up for ourselves so that people won't treat us badly. And the worst is if you're black and brown, you get treated even worse, have poorer outcomes, which again make it known you're safer out of hospital than in hospital.
Yeah. I think...
Not just for birth.
Yeah, I guess... Yeah, I mean, so the listeners of this episode, I think this is a very thought-provoking episode, as I probably would have expected. But I honestly, I never really thought about... I didn't think that I had power when, I was going through... I mean, that's obviously a more simple case. But I didn't think that I had power. I just, I trusted that I could decline, and I didn't know any better, I suppose. I thought I knew, but I didn't know. But that kind of thing, to stand up for yourself in that sort of way, at least not in Australia, at least not in my education, was never sort of taught to us. It's kind of like something, taking legal action is something you see in movies or on TV, or it's something that you can only do if you're rich, So I think a lot of people don't stand up for themselves, and especially, I mean, the rates of birth trauma, I imagine across the world, but in Australia definitely are rising. And I think the statistic is that one in every three women that give birth end up with a traumatic birth. But there's not, I don't think, a rise in cases against the systems that are creating that problem or perpetuating that problem. And I think that is probably a lot to do with that people just don't know that they do have power and that they can stand up for themselves.
It's interesting. I mean, my personal motivation is partly family dynamic, that I had wonderful parents in their abilities, but my mother was very stressed and traumatized from her own life experiences. And my father was not present because he had to be at work. And when he was at home, he didn't deal with conflict or stand up for us. So by people not standing up, my mother screamed and shouted and hit us all the time. So having somebody not stand up for you means I will stand up for others. So when I see a parent hit their child, that child used to be me.
Yeah. So
I'll go over and say, "Are you okay? How can I help? What can we do?" And they're like, "Go away, mind your own business." I'm like, "No, I'm here. That's not okay. Yeah. So let me, how can I help?" And it's been very awkward and difficult and embarrassing. I thought my neighbours might, burn my house down if I've offered to help the neighbours.
Yeah.
But we got to stand up for others. If we don't stand up for others, who will stand up for us?
Yeah. 1000%, Paul. Like I say with, or like a lot of the midwives I speak to, but especially with you, I feel like we could talk for hours. You said that you have already a book and you're about to release another book. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If anybody looks on Amazon Kindle, they'll see my books if you cite my name.
Yeah.
There's the Lucy Letby one. That's the most organised book about a wrongful conviction. It could happen to any of us. And there's lots of learning in that. Second book will come out on that. There's Keeping Midwives Safe, and there's Protect Your Practice, which will be out later this month. There's another one, Law and Mediation. So that was a lot of research. Mostly my work in New Zealand is in that book.
Yeah, wow.
So they're all useful, and they're all, I think they're £9.99 pounds, euros, US dollars, so half, double the dollars for Australia and New Zealand.
Fascinating.
Also Gumroad. Yeah. But thank you for letting me give a plug on the books.
Yeah,
I hope they can be useful to people, and I welcome people to be in touch. My time is limited. I'm overrun with things, but I can often give a quick answer to something or signpost people. That's why I wrote the books, actually, to save a lot of talking.
Yeah.
They can just read the books and answer their own questions.
Yeah. I absolutely will be getting a copy. I think that's quite incredible, and it's obviously very unique what you do, and we need more of you. It definitely seems. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you. I'm wishing you and all your listeners great self-compassion.